Welcome, Army fans. This is Joe Iacono with GoBlackKnights.com, along with Steve Kreipe, West Point grad, and one of the co-hosts of Crawdad's Countdown to Kickoff. Steve, how you doing? How's the spring going for you down there in Huntsville, Alabama, right?
Doing well. Yeah, it's yeah, nice time of the year in Alabama. Not too hot, not too cold. I wish I could just stay like this year round. But the sad part is Army spring ball's done. So we're in that dry period between now and when preseason kicks off.
We're in limbo, waiting for waiting for preseason to start. With your show, do you guys do a lot of coverage in the off season, or you primarily get rolling in like August or September?
Yeah, yeah, heading into the preseason and through the bowl game, pretty much season specific kind of format.
Good stuff. Well, Steve, all the rage lately on the message boards at GBK and really all throughout the Army football world lately has been around the transfer portal and NIL. It's funny, it's been a big topic across college football for a number of years now, but it seems to have impacted Army harder recently than it typically does with Elo Mendoza, of course, going to the Georgia Bulldogs. Prior to that, Kanye Udo going to Arizona State, and now Donovan Platt and Jaden Mays, the starting corners, have both entered the portal. No real news on them yet, but total, there's 17 Army players who've entered the portal since spring ball ended. We were talking a couple of days ago. You had a really interesting take on that, I think. So give us your feelings and thoughts, not only around Elo and Donovan and Jaden as three pretty big time guys who would have made a huge impact next year, but also around some of the folks who were cut from the Army team and decided to enter the portal.
Yeah, I mean, man, you could go in just about a half a dozen different directions off of that. But one thing I want to say up front is, talking to former Army football players, this time of year is a big churn in the roster. I mean, for years, that's you come out of spring ball, and especially a lot of these freshmen, because you think about the talent you need to have to make it to D1 football, and these are players their entire football career dating back to Pop Warner or whatever flag football, they've been a starter. Suddenly they get into this environment, and what do you mean? I'm not on the 2D roster, and that hits some guys pretty hard, and they don't have to, and it's okay. You're not going to show me the love. I'm going to go someplace else. And so the difference between now and say 10 years ago, before the advent of the transfer portal, the first time we noticed these guys no longer being on the roster was come fall. And that was only if you were really paying attention to a lot of
Yeah,
these kids or underclassmen and go, oh, hey, I remember so and so. Why is he on the roster? But to the casual fan, that kind of churn
they never
was
noticed.
oblivious to it. Now suddenly there's this formal transfer portal, and it's published, and there's the official NCAA site, and multiple sports sites are cataloging, keeping track, and suddenly you pull up there and what 17 players, and I would contend that's probably not significantly different than it was in
Than
the
it's
past.
ever been. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I will not try to minimize the impact, especially on defense, that it's had. These were quality players with experience under the belt, projected starters. That's you just can't dismiss that, and so that's hard. But is this something we can expect going forward? I'm just not sure. And again, I don't take this comment as being um, condescending toward the level of talent that Army gets, but our cap, if you equate it to a lot of whether it's rivals or others, that 3-star player is about our ceiling, and
Yeah.
typically those are not guys that are getting thrown those NIL contracts and those kind of things. I mean, I would even contend that what Army offers in terms of a monthly income, everything taken care of, I think that's probably comparable to what other schools are offering this level of athlete. Now, Udo, man, I was excited about him coming back and really taking that next step. the three defenders, similarly. So that's tough. But I don't know that we can expect, especially the two prominent departures that supposedly got offered some pretty decent deals. I don't know if that's going to be the norm for Army going forward.
Yeah, and you bring up some interesting points there, Steve. I think like you mentioned, the fact that, when you play at Army, you do get a monthly salary, small although it may be. But also your top-notch education is taken care of. That's another huge advantage. And it was interesting. I didn't realize it's funny because the portal and NIL are newer for Army fans. And maybe you know way more about them than I do, but I interviewed UGA Sports' rivals guy this morning, Roddy Nabolsi, and one of the things he and I discussed, he was telling me about how really how NIL works, and it was really interesting. Like it's not an annual contract; it's a month-to-month contract in a lot of cases. So
Right.
the kids make X amount a month. He said a lot of the figures you hear thrown out there in the media aren't real figures. They're kind of overblown, and I don't know what Medozi's gonna make, but somewhere probably in the 20 to 40,000 a month range is
Yeah.
kind of what we've been hearing. The other interesting thing about it, he said, a lot. If you're a coach at a big D1 program like Kirby Smart at Georgia, you're recruiting your high school kids, but you're also recruiting out of the portal. And these agents, and I say that with quote marks, air quotes, because who knows if they're really agents or not. These agents are actually doing a lot of the discovery work, so to speak, for the college coaches. And they're setting up Zoom calls and they're going, guys, here's some of the guys I've been reaching out to that'll probably be available for you. So they
Yeah.
kind of preset the table for the coaches, really take a lot of work off their plates. And with it was funny with Ello, he was mentioning that Georgia has like a specific list of criteria. This shows you how different it is recruiting at Army versus recruiting
Oh
at
yeah.
UGA or Bama.
Just a
They
little
have
bit.
this list of measurables, and if a kid doesn't meet the measurables, they're pretty much out. Like height,
Wow.
weight, speed, all that. It's like they either do or they better be exceptional for some other reason. So I
Wow.
just thought that was a super interesting conversation and kind of showed the difference between the two worlds. But I would agree with you that I think, when we were both cadets, there was a lot of churn on the football team in the spring. You just didn't hear about it because there was no transfer portal.
Yeah.
I think what we've seen outside of Medozi and obviously Kanye, who's now fully immersed at Arizona State, is I haven't heard of any of the other kids getting offers anywhere else. And maybe they have and it's just been kind of quiet, but if they're still taking classes at West Point, there's a decent chance that, if they weren't cut from the football team in the case of Platt and Mays, potentially they're back on the team next year. The other kids clearly weren't good enough to make the team. So it's just an interesting world we live in. So to say that, the follow-up question for you, Steve, is if I made you the fictitious commissioner of college football for a day, or maybe took General Gillen's place as the soup at West Point, what would you do to kind of fix the transfer portal and NIL as they currently stand, either for college football writ large, or maybe specifically the way it affects the academies?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start big picture. I mean, that's a great question because I mean it is so complex. One, I think we've all almost have to adopt a lot of things that the professional leagues have done it, whether it's basketball, football, the NFL, and that. We're tampering. There's a window of opportunity to approach others, all those kind of things. I do think there needs to be a left and right boundary in terms of the money that's being thrown at these guys. I mean, as I understand some of the proposals that are on the table, they're going to be effectively become university employees. But it's going to create that an additional tier in college football. We've got the FBS and the FCS right now. I think within the FBS, those Power Five or really Power Four conferences right now are going to be that elite level that have the money, that have the resources to do those kind of things. But I think if you're going to, treat them as employees, create those, boundaries, if you will, on the money, because there's just being, at the elite level, it's some crazy money being thrown around. So I think tampering. There's a window in there. All those kind of things I think need to be put in there. I think bringing that home to West Point. One of the thoughts that crossed my mind is, I think, in years past, you recruit, and I told you, if you talk to the coaching staff, I don't know how they do it. It is a brutal schedule. The off season, they probably even work harder in some respects. They're on the road all the time.
Yeah.
But that's that heavy recruiting period. And once that guy, our day, raise a hand, shows up, at Mikey that first practice. I mean, okay, I can relax. I got my guy. But I think what's going to have to happen is they need to continue to recruit existing cadets, existing football players, to remind them, that what do you have, as a West Point graduate, that resume entry right there opens doors. The network, the organic network you have among grads, what that does for you,
Yeah.
also. But conversely, I think there is a notion, and this actually, when I first time I discovered this, I was a bit surprised. There is a notion. Well, I attended my a full year or a semester at West Point. I can still put that on my transcript. Every person that I've talked to that was a former cadet that left before graduation, when they put that on their resume, people look at you attended. Well, what did you do wrong?
Why did you leave?
Yes, you couldn't hack it. I mean, it raises more question
It
than.
actually raises more red flags as opposed to pilots. It was funny when I was talking to the UGA guy this morning. He talked about, I asked him some of the things they liked about Ello, and he said, whenever Kirby gets a guy through the portal, the first question he asks him is, why did you leave where you were? And trying to find out, is this a me guy or is this a team guy? And
Yeah.
they did say one of the things they really liked about Ello was they really thought he was a team guy. But
Oh yeah, yeah, no doubt. But I think it's that kind of recruiting, reminding them the benefits of remaining there, the quality education, how that sets you for life, opens up all kinds of opportunities. The fact, remind them of what they've got here and now in terms of that monthly check. Everything else is taken care of. They have no needs. Those kind of things. And then what's the downside if you punch out? So I think that message is going to have to constantly be put out there, almost every semester, as people are whispering in their ears. And as I understand it, a lot of these quote unquote agents are approaching parents. That's
parents,
that's
exactly.
that's their
Yeah.
entryway. Talk to mom and dad, and lay out the road of gold leading to fame and riches and an NFL opportunity, and then it's mom and dad talking to the player. And so I think it's if that constant recruiting mentality, reminding them what they have, reminding them of the downside of departing West Point. Because I don't know about you, to this day, with one exception, I've only talked to one person who left West Point that at some point in their life that, man, I'm not sure that was the right decision. I really regret that.
I was, yeah, a lot of people that I have talked to said the exact same thing. I was talking to John Brolman, who's a 90 grad. He's been a guest on our show with you. He mentioned he had a buddy of his who was on the wrestling team and he left and went to a D2 school. And he said, man, it was like one of the worst choices I probably ever made. It's just the ability to get a 19 or 20-year-old to see long term. And like you said, I think with the agents whispering sweet nothings in their parents' ears, if your parents are telling you to leave, that becomes even a bigger. I know for me personally, when I was a kid, one of the things that kept me at West Point was I really didn't want to let my dad down, honestly. Like that was a big deal to me.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah, no doubt.
yeah, and I think a lot of other kids are talk. I mentioned right before we got on. I just talked to the D Domenicos and the Dailies, and I mean, you could just see how proud they were of their sons for what they've just accomplished and are getting ready to accomplish in the big Army, quote unquote. Completely agree with you about, if you're a coach at Army, and really not just Army, really any G5 school, to be
Yes.
honest with you right now, you are constantly in recruiting mode. The good news is at Army, it does end when they take the affirmation oath and walk into class first day Cal year for the most part, with a few weird exceptions. But that they do have to, you recruit the kids out of high school, recruit them if they go to the prep, which a lot of them do. You got to recruit them out of use maps. Then you got to recruit them after plebe year, and like you said, even during plebe year. And then you got to recruit them at the end of yearling year as well, before they get ready to transition. And so you are recruiting kids 4 different times in a lot of cases to keep them around.
Yeah. Yeah. The final thing I would, and I don't know if it's still in effect. At one point, if you departed the military academy under certain circumstances, if you wanted to transfer your transcripts to another school, you had to pay for that by the credit hour, and it
Yeah,
was
I
no.
heard you say that. I wasn't
Yes,
aware of that. That's
yes.
really
Now I don't
interesting.
know if that's still in effect or what categories that apply to. I think that's something that they need to implement because an athlete, there's that extra investment beyond just the cadet experience, the military training, the academics. You're investing a whole lot of high cost, kind of things. And okay, you want to leave? Okay, it will cost you $450 a credit hour
Yep.
for that transcript. And then it creates sort of a sort of a pain threshold. Am I willing to cut that check? And depending if I'm uncertain about an NIL or those kind of things, then maybe that gives me pause enough to think it through and say I'm not sure I want to do that. So that's another thing. Because they're talking about that they're going to, under the arrangement that, again, there's a lot of rumors, and so I don't know how true this is. They're actually going to sign a contract, and people have been saying, well, cadets don't sign contracts. Well, maybe if you're an athlete, you do sign a
You
contract
do.
for
Yeah.
what you receive as a cadet.
Well, that's kind of been my I don't want to say argument, but my stance on this is, you'd have to get all three D1 football academies to go along with it, Army, Navy, and Air Force, so that there's no unfair advantage. But there's all kinds of rules right now that they have that the other schools don't have. Why
Yes.
can't we make up extra rules just for academy players around NIL and transfer portal? Like, for example, I don't know, just some ideas I've kind of batted around. Maybe we make the affirmation and the commitment for athletes at the start of sophomore year instead of the start of junior year. Because
Yeah.
not here's the huge upside to that for Army and Navy and Air Force is not a lot of plebes see a lot of playing time their freshman year. Kanye did, he was kind of an exception, but like
Yep.
nobody would have known who Elo Mendoza was a year ago.
Yes.
And all of a
Exactly.
sudden, boom, he's leading the conference in tackles for loss or sacks or whatever it
Yes.
was.
Yes.
And it's like, maybe that's a solution. Maybe it's like you said, maybe they sign a contract that says, and Charles and I have discussed this. It might hurt recruiting a little bit on the front side, but at least it kind of takes some of the work off the coaches of having to recruit kids, 4 different times, so to speak.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the other element, just speaking of changing the rules, and I know you followed as close as I have over the years, the way the pendulum swings back and forth on whether or not athletes can go directly into a professional league after graduation. I personally believe let them do it. Again,
Yup,
just run the probability and stats, exercise on
right.
the probability of, you can look at, college football writ large. Look at the percentages that land in the NFL. It's really infinitesimal, and
Very
so,
tiny, yeah.
and
I
so,
think this year, I mean, there's a couple guys with some camp invites. We mentioned Lucas
yeah,
Scott, which is great. I think Rayon Lane from Navy got drafted
yeah,
by Jacksonville, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, it's all three academies combined. It's usually less than 3 people a year.
yeah. So allow them to have that hope,
Yep.
and I don't know about you. I've got several classmates who came in because they wanted to play football. I mean, that was their,
Yeah,
and Army was their opportunity to play D1 football. But then they went on to have incredible military careers,
military careers, absolutely,
fantastic leaders. I will say some of the best leaders I've known have been Army football players. So,
absolutely.
but allow them to have that dream if that's what gets their juices
Yeah,
going as they're maturing. Because a typical 18-year-old dude, coming out of high school, I know I wasn't particularly mature. I had some some stuff to work through, but allow them that maturing process that I think actually West Point accelerates. And so by the time they're turning 20, 21, 22, man, this is what I want to do. What a great
this is what
opportunity.
I want to do. Yeah, you're right. It's amazing how many Army football players, especially under Coach Monken, have branched. Now, I'm not picking on any of their other branches. Believe me, I'm not an infantry guy. But how many of these guys have branched infantry? How many of them have gone to Ranger school and graduated Ranger school? Both Max and Bryson are going to be going to Ranger school. I talked to their parents. Yeah. I mean, I'm with you. Give them the option. The pro football hook should still be there. And to me, I've never understood this. To me, it's a completely moot argument. Like, why don't we let cadets go pro right away? For all the Olympic sports, there's the world class athlete program. There's kids who go to grad school on Rhodes scholarships and Marshalls, and that's equally as small a percentage of kids. It's not like we're graduating 1,200 or
Yeah,
1,100 kids per class, and half of them aren't going into the army as
yes,
lieutenants. It's
the
it's
floodgates are not
add
going to.
it all up, and it's like 20 people at the end of the
Exactly.
day.
So even in the normal what we've seen in recent years, okay, you lose one or two players to the NFL that are going to be delayed service, deferred service, and that. Okay, but the notoriety, because you've seen, especially when Andre Carter, I mean, on draft day, the coverage that West Point got was phenomenal. You could not put a dollar figure on that. And those are, young high schoolers that are watching the draft and going, wow, West Point, oh, you could go in the NFL.
You could go
I
to
used
West
to
Point
play
and go to
next
the
football.
NFL. Yeah. Brett Toth just winning the Super Bowl with the Eagles. We've got two Super Bowl champs now with him and Cole Christensen. And
Yeah.
and he was in Charleston, South Carolina, where he's from. I don't know if you saw this or not. They had a Brett Toth day where they gave him the key to the city, which was really cool.
Outstanding.
So I think you're right. I think like if we're gonna do this and make it more restrictive for kids for portal and NIL, the other lever is giving them the opportunity to go pro right away, which I think, would be an easy enough sell, especially with the current administration when that was the plan they put in place last time they were in office.
Yeah,
So
and get it codified so as players come in, they're not wondering, okay, is this policy going to last for another 4 years? Lock it
right.
in by law or whatever it takes so there's some stability. That makes it easier on the coaches as they're recruiting. I just to me that's a no brainer.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. All right, let's move on to a more fun topic, Steve. Let's talk about what are your thoughts? And this is unfortunate because of all the media and press that's been spent on all this stuff with the guys hitting the portal. Army did choose, as they do every year at the end of spring practice, the kids vote on who they want to be the team captains for the next year. And this year they picked two doozies in Caleb Fortner and Andon Thomas, the dual inside linebacker hammers, who I've gone on record as saying as good as Elo Mendoza is, and I get it's a different position, it's edge rusher. Fortner and Thomas are better linebackers than Mendoza is, and I will go to my grave saying that.
Yeah.
What do you think about those two, their leadership abilities, and what they can bring to the table as the new captains of the Army football team?
Oh yeah. I mean, to me, I'll start macro level. Given the losses on the defense to the transfer portal, I think it's actually fortuitous that we've got two defensive captains. It's going to draw the attention there. I think those two guys, great leaders on the field. And again, I would tell you, when you think about it, West Point, I mean, at its core is a leadership school. And so it draws leaders. It draws people who want to be challenged to be leader, to be excellent leaders. And then by your peers, they say, you're a guy I'm going to follow. And that speaks volumes about them. And I can just see them in the locker room, out on the field, where these departures become a motivator. Okay, next man up, let's get after it. No downside here. We've got new opportunities. We're going to show them. We're going to make those guys regret that they left because they're not going to be a part of who we are. So I think two great selections. And one of the things I love about Monken and the culture that he's instilled there, especially with regard to the selection of captains, most teams out there, okay, we're going to have four captains or we're going to have three captains. Certain programs got an offensive, defensive, and a special teams captain. They have sort of we got to fill these slots. Within Army, there's a criteria, there's votes. There's a consensus building that happens. And one year, last year had four. This
Yep.
year we got two.
Yep.
And there's an elite aspect to that okay, we're not trying to fill slots. We're recognizing the leaders that are already on the rosters and the guys that the rest of the players want to follow.
Absolutely. I think you bring up a good point there, Steve, with the extra motivation. It's funny, I remember talking to Kelvin Hopkins years ago, and he talked about how Army players are best when they have a giant chip on their shoulder. And it's like, just give us something else. Give us another reason not to win and watch and see what we do, right? So really cool stuff there. So, speaking about the 2025 season, now that spring practice is wrapped up and we are getting ready to go into the off season prior to preseason camp, the 2024 team minus the big game that nobody liked the outcome of that. Minus that, it was probably right there with 2018, the best team we've seen at Army in 20, 30 years. They've kind of set the standard. So, conference champs, first year in the conference, everything else. Not that not that the 2025 kids have to compare themselves with last year's team. Like Coach Monken always says, every team is a brand new team. Uh, but can they kind of what is your outlook for the 25 season? Can they keep up the standard? Can they have the same level of success? If not, kind of where do you see this team falling at the end of the day? And I know with all the other schools in the AAC having to deal with the portal too, predicting things is almost impossible these days, but go for it.
Oh yeah, I've been a regular Phil Steele, preview for years, and this year I didn't even do it because I don't know how he, given the churn that's happening right now as they're trying to finalize it, it's really not it's difficult for him to put the finger on the pulse. But I think the 2025 team, it's going to be, I mean, need to say a hard act to follow because I think I'll go ahead and say what you didn't want to say. Losing the Navy, it is amazing. We had a 12-win season, and we go into the off season like Eeyore. Oh man, I can't believe this.
Right.
Um, and had they beat Navy, I think they would have been right up there with the '96 team. All those kind of really elite level, and maybe even further back. Into the '50s and '40s, maybe. So that was a disappointment. But again, yet another reminder, like we needed, of the importance of the Navy game. To the fan base. But it's a 12-win team following that's going to be really tough, especially breaking in a new quarterback. Now, Monken's got some options there that with those that have some game reps. Um, but that's always a question mark. When you're breaking in someone new, because so much of running an option based offense, it's got to be instinctive. If you're thinking about what do I do next,
Yeah.
you're behind the
That's when
power.
mistakes happen. Yep. Mhm.
Yeah, and does the offensive line, with a couple new people in there, does that congeal? Because again, man, the offensive line, again, talk about a tough act to follow. Really up there mentioning with all the elite offensive lines this past year with was it the Joe
Right.
Moore Award? I mean, remarkable. But does that come together? And I think even the fact, I mentioned the upside of two defensive captains. The downside is the absence of an offensive captain sort of speaks to some of the challenges that lie ahead. Who steps up, who becomes those informal leaders, who becomes those organic leaders to step up. Ideally, it's your quarterback. Ideally,
Yeah.
I'd like to see one
I
on the
could see
offensive
it
line.
being junior center Brady Small.
Yes. Yeah, I was actually surprised that he was not selected there, and not sure that
Right.
necessarily was a
Probably
negative.
as an underclassman, I'm thinking maybe. I mean, we've had junior captains before, but they've been
Yes.
few and far between. Yeah.
Yeah, but so I think all those kind of things, if the offensive comes together and they sort of hit their stride early, I think we could approach that because I think you know Munkin has developed such a process. Everything. I mean, it's almost mechanical, but
It,
it
it
is so
really is.
it's
Yeah.
so effective because how efficient he runs those the practices and just the intentional maturation that he likes to see and the culture that he's done. So when we're plugging in new players, I think it happens much quicker than say his first 3 to 5
Yeah.
years with the program. So it would not surprise me that given all that they hit their stride early and it's like, okay, we're going to follow in 2024's footsteps and we're going to hit the mark as well. I think that in certain aspects, tougher schedule, like you say, it's tough to predict how difficult your schedule
I
is.
mean, they don't. The toughest game on the schedule this year is probably K-State uh,
Yeah,
at at Manhattan. It's probably a loss, but it's not as much of a mismatch as Notre Dame was.
yeah,
So that's helpful. And then everything else is really up for grabs, to be honest with you.
yes. And it was, I was looking at, the transfer portal haul. There's a few of our opponents that picked up some people. Again, is it really an upgrade or was that just okay not to go downhill? That remains to be
Yeah.
seen. But I think 2024 should provide all kinds of optimism, not only for the team, but I think for the fan base. Because I don't know about you, when I heard the first grumblings about conference affiliation, I'm immediately almost Pavlovian, Conference USA,
It was
and
so funny to me to watch that reaction because I really wasn't in that camp and I understood all the disasters that happened last, but I'm like, this is I knew it was a completely different environment, and I'm like, I was kind of behind the move from the get-go, to be
yeah,
honest with you.
I,
Not
it,
that I thought we'd believe me, I don't want to take credit. I did not think we'd win the conference in year one, but
we'll just call you the prophet from now on. Um,
yeah.
but we clearly can compete in this league. Given the level of talent, not a huge jump to the other teams. So we know we can compete, but it goes back to Coach Munkin's mantra. We're never going to be the most talented team on the field.
Yeah.
So that's not what we're going to rely on it, but it's effort and flawless execution. The things that he continues to beat those drums that 2024 shows if we follow his blueprint, if we do give best effort. If from that first snap, the guy we line up across from, we let him know, boom, okay, we're in a dogfight here.
Yeah.
We do those kind of things, we know we can compete and we know we can win. So that right there, if there was any doubt in our minds, I think that went out in 2024. And I will say though, that where my reluctance was, I've always felt that one of the advantages of being an option based offense is that so few defenses out there face that. And so many times it's the first time and maybe the only time in their, those players, the opponents' career that they're going to face it. And it's that unfamiliarity that at least the first half, they're just getting acclimated
They're
to it.
trying to catch up to the game speed of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I felt like that's what really hit us. Well, there were a lot of different dynamics in
There
conference
was a
USA.
lot of games we jumped out to big leads early.
Yes.
Um, East Carolina, I think we were beating them 35 to nothing before they
Yeah.
woke up, really. It was
Yeah.
nasty.
Yeah. Speaking of East Carolina, I think that's going to be a really tough game.
That's a
Uh,
tough game at ECU on a Thursday night. And
yeah.
that program, after we beat them, really turned it around. And I think that interim coach kept the job there. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I have that as one of the toughest outs. That at Tulane is another tough one.
Oh, yeah.
We've never played well in the state of Louisiana.
Oh, I know.
Barry.
I was there in 2020 during COVID, and yeah, that was not a good game to be at. But both those teams really picked up, a lot of players on the transfer portal. And speaking of East Carolina, I read recently that they've got some very affluent fans within their fan base that are pumping money into them specifically
Hmm.
for the transfer portal and NIL contracts. So I think they're going to be formidable. That's a program that wants to break into one of the Power Four conferences. That's their stated goal, and
Makes
so
sense.
and they've got the resources to do it. And Tulane, that's another one.
Another one that's right there. Yeah.
Exactly.
Thankfully, Memphis isn't on the schedule because they're one of the tougher teams in the conference consistently.
Yeah.
But yeah, I immediately circled at Tulane and at ECU as two of the tougher games on the calendar in the AAC. And
Completely
of
agree.
course, the rivalry games are going to be a dogfight. After Air Force got beat by us and they played us tough,
Yep.
they turned it around. They started winning a lot. So they're a pretty young, talented team, and we're at Colorado Springs, which is never an easy place to play.
Oh yeah.
So there are a lot of challenges on the schedule. The Mikey schedule is pretty friendly, I feel like, although with transfers, who can tell? But it feels pretty friendly to me. So
Yes,
it's
I agree.
yeah, but I think your point about familiarity with the option is interesting because I think that's another one of the hidden advantages. I'm starting to come up with this kind of list of hidden advantages for Army in the transfer portal era is there's so many portal kids at these schools that they are playing with a new defensive coordinator, whether the DC's new at that school or not, his scheme for stopping the option, they're not going to be familiar with it. As if you got a defense with 7 or 8 kids who came in through the portal, they're going to be playing catch up the first half.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. Matter of fact, you just jarred a little something in my memory on the recruiting standpoint. Every single coach we had on the show last year said that they believe the situation with the transfer portal and the high churn in all the programs out there is a feather in the cap for Army because that's their selling point when they're in the living room talking with parents, talking with players. You have the opportunity to jump into a program and you're going to lock arms with your fellow freshmen that first year, and you will be with them all 4 years.
Yep, you
And that,
graduate with the same group of kids. Yep.
yeah, that's a true brotherhood environment. But to your point, yeah, given that churn, it's familiarity with our offense may not be there. So yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. So, well, Steve, thanks a ton for your time. I know you have other things you could be doing on a Wednesday night, so we super appreciate it. And always add some great insight to the show. It's really awesome. I'll give you a chance to do a quick shameless promo for Crawdad, so go ahead.
Yeah, Crawdads, our big focal point is our Facebook page. We've got some just great members there, former football players, a lot of parents there, and just a great environment if you want to mix it up with with the fellow Army fans. That's a great opportunity there. But come the fall, come August, we'll start doing the weekly show, and that's generally a mix of we generally always get someone from the coaching staff, former players. We get a lot of the bloggers on there as well. So that's if you want to get caught up with the latest and greatest, that's a great opportunity for folks out there.
Awesome stuff. Well, thanks again, Steve. Really appreciate it. Army fans, big week on the podcast. We'll be releasing three different interviews this week. So pay attention. A lot of good stuff around the transfer portal and NIL. We've got a great parents segment with the D Domenicos and the dailies. Go ahead and do me a favor, Army fans, and subscribe to our YouTube page. All those subscriptions help us pay for all the great personal content we bring you. You guys know we have a lot of access to Coach Monk and Coach Worley, Coach Woody, and the rest of the staff, and we get great interviews like this with guys like Steve. So please go ahead and like and subscribe to our free YouTube channel. Despite what some other people may say out there on the internet, we do offer a lot of our content for free. So go ahead and subscribe to that. And Army fans, it's been a pleasure. We will see you soon. Go Army, beat Navy.